I was promised something since I was 10. A future. A college fund. A way out. My dad said it was taken care of. But when my acceptance letter finally came, the money was gone. Used not for me, but for someone else's emergency. This isn't just a story about broken promises. It's about what happens when your own family chooses someone else over you and expects you to smile through it. In this video, you're going to hear the full journey. From betrayal to rebuilding. From silence to survival. And how one girl turned heartbreak into power, not with revenge, but with her voice. Stay with me, because by the end, you might just see your own story and hers. And if you do, don't forget to subscribe. This channel isn't just about stories, it's about finally being heard. I never expected life to hand me everything. I knew from early on that nothing comes easy, especially not in our house. But one thing I did believe in was the college fund. My dad talked about it like it was a promise carved in stone. Every now and then, he'd mention it at dinner. "Don't worry, your future's taken care of," he'd say. I held on to those words like they were gold. I wasn't the kind of kid who slacked off. I worked hard. Honor roll, volunteer hours, after-school jobs, I did it all. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I thought I was building something. A life. A future. I stayed out of trouble, kept my head down, and tried to do everything right. So when I got accepted into my top university, the one I'd dreamed about for years, I felt like all those years of effort had finally meant something. I remember holding the acceptance letter in my hands, thinking, this is it. It's happening. My mom hugged me. My little sister was jumping around. But my dad? He went quiet. I noticed it right away. He didn't smile. Didn't even say, "Congratulations." Just this tight, awkward nod. I figured maybe he was just processing it or stressed about the cost. Still, in my head, I kept telling myself, it's okay, we have the fund. A few days later, I sat down with him. It was late in the evening. Everyone else had gone to bed. I told him I needed to make the first payment, housing deposit, enrollment fees. I wasn't asking for extra, just what he'd always promised. And then he said it. "There's no money." Just like that. 3 words. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He didn't look at me when he spoke. "The college fund, it's gone." I thought I'd misheard him. "Gone how?" He paused. Then finally said, "We had to use it. For your brother." My stomach dropped. My brother had been acting weird after high school. Depressed. Lost. He took a gap year that turned into a series of retreats, travel, therapy. I didn't ask much. I thought he needed space. I didn't know how he was affording it. Turns out, I was the one paying. They used my college fund. The one I'd counted on for years. I just sat there. Completely numb. "You didn't think I deserved to know?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "It was a family decision, but I wasn't part of it," I said quietly. I didn't cry that night. I didn't yell either. I just stared at him. A man who had promised me something for years, with confidence, with pride, now sitting across from me, looking small, like he wanted me to understand and move on. But I couldn't. Not right away. I got up, walked back to my room, and shut the door. No drama. No slamming. Just silence. The kind that fills every corner and makes your chest feel tight. I sat on the floor, staring at my books. My laptop was open, still on the university welcome page. I'd already picked my courses, joined a few student groups online, even started looking for roommates. My dream wasn't just a dream anymore, it was real. It was about to begin. But now, suddenly, it wasn't. I barely slept that night. My mind was spinning. I kept thinking, maybe I'd misjudged things. Maybe there was still something left, some backup plan, some way out. Maybe he was wrong. So the next morning before school, I went to my mom. She was in the kitchen, making tea like always. I sat down and asked her straight up, "Did you know the college fund is gone?" She didn't look surprised. That's what hit the hardest. She took a slow breath and said, "We didn't want to hurt you. But your brother was in a dark place. We didn't know what else to do." I stared at her, waiting for her to say something more. Something like, "We'll fix this," or "We'll find a way." But she just stood there, stirring her tea, avoiding eye contact. So that's it? I asked. He gets lost and I lose everything I've worked for?
He didn't ask for this, she said.
We made the decision as parents. I wanted to scream. Not because my brother was struggling, I cared about him, of course I did. But because I wasn't even given a chance to matter in that decision. I was expected to understand, to accept, to pause my life so someone else could figure theirs out. And the worst part? No one even said sorry. Not a single word of apology. Just explanations. Justifications. For days, I walked around the house like a ghost. I still went to school, still showed up to work. But inside, something had cracked. Something that trust once held together. I stopped checking my university email. I stopped opening those orientation messages. I even started avoiding my friends because how could I explain this? How do you tell someone your future was used to fund someone else's breakdown? The silence at home grew louder every day. My dad tried once to talk again, to explain more, to be honest, but I shut it down. I couldn't sit through another round of rationalizations. Not when every time I looked at him, I saw a broken promise. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about betrayal. About being invisible in your own family. They chose him. And left me behind. I started looking for alternatives, community college, online courses, even working full-time for a year. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. No one offered a real solution. They just kept saying, "We know it's hard." Like that helped anything. At school, people congratulated me on my acceptance. I smiled, nodded, played along. I couldn't bring myself to say, "I'm not going." Not yet. Not when the dream was still fresh in my mind. My best friend, Anya, noticed something was off. We'd been planning to move out together, even looked at a few dorm layouts online. One afternoon, she pulled me aside and said, "Are you okay? You've been weirdly quiet about everything." I hesitated, then told her everything. Her face went blank. "Wait, they spent your college fund? Without even asking?" I nodded. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "That's not just unfair. That's betrayal." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't just in my head. What they did was wrong, no matter the reasons, no matter the excuses. I started resenting the silence in our house. My brother called once from some retreat center in another country, talking about healing through silence and disconnecting from pressure. I wanted to scream into the phone. I didn't get to disconnect. I had to stay and clean up the mess. But I didn't say that. I just listened. He had no idea what I'd lost for him. And no one had told him. My parents still hadn't told him where the money came from. They protected him from guilt, while I was left carrying it all. At night, I'd lie in bed and think, what was the point of doing everything right if being reckless still gets rewarded? What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the message. You don't matter as much. I started pulling away. I stopped coming home straight after school. Took longer shifts at work. Sometimes I just sat in the park for an hour doing nothing because it felt better than walking into a house that no longer felt like home. One evening, my dad asked me if I wanted to sit for dinner. I said I already ate. I hadn't. That became our routine, pretending everything was okay when none of it was. A few weeks later, my university emailed me a final reminder. Enrollment deadline approaching. Submit payment to secure your spot. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart sank, but I already knew what I was going to do. I didn't reply. I didn't call them. I just let the deadline pass. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not because I was sad, but because I felt powerless. I had done everything I could. This wasn't about bad luck. This was a choice, their choice, and now I had to live with it. The next morning, I printed out my resume and started applying to local jobs, office assistant, receptionist, retail, whatever I could find. I needed to do something, anything to keep moving. I couldn't sit at home pretending everything was okay when I felt like I was breaking. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes in the back of a store, I got a message from my cousin. She'd seen my college post on Instagram and was excited to meet up on campus. I didn't reply. That was the moment I realized how much pretending I had done. Online, I was still the girl going to university. In real life, I was the girl who got robbed of her chance by her own family. That weekend, I decided to confront them, not with shouting or drama, but with the truth. I asked my dad calmly, if it had been me who needed help, would you have used his fund? He didn't answer. So I asked again, slower this time. If I was the one spiraling, would you have emptied his future for me? Still silence. I nodded. That's what I thought. He tried to speak, said something like, it's not about favorites. I cut him off. It is. You picked one child over the other. And now I'm the one cleaning up the damage. My mom stood in the hallway, quiet. My sister watched from the stairs. No one said a word. I left the house that night. Went to stay with Anya for a few days. Her family welcomed me, like I was one of their own. They didn't ask for details. They just gave me space. That silence felt different. It felt safe. Living with Anya gave me the clarity I didn't realize I needed. Her house wasn't big, and we shared a room, but it was peaceful. No awkward glances. No silent guilt filling the air. Her parents asked simple questions. How was work? Had I eaten? And that was it. I didn't have to explain myself. I didn't have to shrink to make space for someone else's crisis. During those few days, I reevaluated everything. I had no plan, no college, and no support from the two people I thought would never let me fall. But for the first time, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I was angry, yes. But beneath that anger, I felt something more powerful, determination. If they weren't going to fight for my future, I would. I made a list of local programs I could afford. Some were weekend only, others online. I searched for second jobs. I reached out to a former teacher who had once told me, if you ever need a reference or a hand, don't hesitate. She responded within an hour and said she helped me apply for a grant she knew about, not a huge amount, but enough to restart something. One evening, while I was helping Anya's mom wash dishes, she turned to me and said gently, you're quiet, but you carry so much. You don't need to do this alone. I almost broke down right there. Not because she was offering help, but because she noticed.
She saw me.
It hit me that I'd spent years being the responsible one, the girl who didn't ask for much, who smiled and kept pushing forward. And maybe that made it easy for my parents to overlook me. I made things easier for everyone. Until I couldn't. Eventually my mom texted. Just 3 words. Come back home. I didn't reply immediately. I stared at the screen for minutes. What was I supposed to come back to? A home where my sacrifices were invisible? Still, after 3 days, I went. Not because I forgave them, but because I needed closure. When I walked in, my dad stood up like he'd been waiting. My mom sat beside him, eyes red. They had written something, a letter, I think. Dad tried to hand it to me, but I didn't take it. You can talk, I said. No need for paper. And for the first time, they actually listened, not to defend, not to interrupt. Just listened. I told them how it felt. How I was made small in a moment where I should have been celebrated. How the trust between us didn't just crack, it collapsed. How I wasn't angry because they helped my brother, but because they didn't even tell me I was being left behind. My mom cried. My dad didn't. But I saw it in his eyes, the shame. They didn't try to fix it. And honestly, they couldn't. Some things, once broken, don't go back the same. After that conversation, something changed, not in them, but in me. I stopped waiting for them to make things right. They couldn't. And I realized I had wasted too much time hoping they would. I packed up the few things I needed and told them I'd be staying with Anya a little longer, maybe even renting a room somewhere if I could afford it. My dad offered to help me look for options. I said I'd manage. I wasn't being cold. I was just unplacing my future in other people's hands. The next few weeks were hard. I worked 2 jobs, one at a bookstore and one at a cafe. My feet hurt all the time and I barely had time to think. But weirdly, I felt more in control than I ever had. Everything I had now, no matter how small, was mine. Earned. Chosen. I enrolled in a local community college. Not fancy, not my dream school, but it had a decent program in media and communications, something I had always been curious about. I took night classes, and sometimes I was too tired to even keep my eyes open, but I pushed through. Every passing week, I felt a little more like myself again. I didn't talk to my brother much. He messaged a few times, random check-ins, some vague updates about where he was. I never replied in detail. Maybe one day I'll tell him everything. Maybe not. One afternoon, while I was walking home after class, I stopped by a park bench and just sat. For the first time in months, I felt still. Not stuck, just still. Like I had survived something. Like I was finally starting to breathe again. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected call. A woman from the grant office. She said my application had been approved for partial funding. Not enough to quit my jobs, but enough to cover tuition for the next semester. I thanked her 3 times in one breath. When I hung up, I sat quietly and let it sink in. No one had saved me. No miracle had come. But I had kept going, and that was enough. I didn't celebrate the grant with anyone. No fancy dinner, no Instagram story, no group text. I just bought myself a coffee after work, sat in the corner of the cafe during my break, and allowed myself to feel proud, quietly. The kind of pride that doesn't need to be posted or announced. I had earned it. All of it. My world was small, but stable. I had a routine: early mornings, late classes, side hustles in between. Some days were heavy, others lighter. But every day felt like movement. Every hour I worked was a step forward. I didn't have time to think about what could have been. I was too busy building what could still be. One evening, my dad showed up at the bookstore. I hadn't told him I worked there, but I guess he figured it out. He stood by the new arrivals section for a while, pretending to look at books he wasn't going to buy. I saw him from the counter, but didn't say anything. Eventually, he walked over and asked, "Can we talk?" I nodded, only because there were other customers around, and I didn't want a scene. He didn't talk about the past this time. No excuses, no explanations. He just said, "I'm proud of you. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to give him peace for free. He handed me a small envelope. "It's not much, but I want you to have it." After he left, I opened it. It was a check, half my tuition for next semester. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Maybe both. I held it in my hand for a long time. It didn't feel like justice, but it felt like effort. A late one, but real. I didn't tell him I used it, but I did. And that semester, for the first time, I only had to work 1 job instead of 2. It felt strange, accepting help from the same person who broke my trust. But I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. Because I was tired of carrying pride that didn't let me breathe. Months passed. Life didn't get easy, but it started feeling manageable. I wasn't bitter all the time anymore. I didn't avoid home. I just redefined it. Sometimes I'd go back on weekends, just to check in on my mom and sister. My dad, and I didn't talk much. He kept his distance. Maybe he thought he'd done enough damage. Or maybe he was just waiting for me to say something. I didn't. One Saturday morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table when my little sister walked in and sat across from me. She was barely 13, but she watched everything. She wasn't loud or dramatic, just observant. After a minute of silence, she said, "I hope when I grow up, I'm like you." I looked up at her, surprised. "You're so strong," she continued, "even when no one helps you." That hit harder than anything anyone had said to me in months. Because she saw what most people ignored, how much I held inside, how much I carried quietly. And I knew right then, I wasn't just rebuilding a future for myself. I was showing her what strength could look like when everything falls apart. At college, things slowly began to change too. I found a professor who saw potential in me. She encouraged me to apply for a mentorship program, something I'd never have considered before. I got in. It connected me with people working in journalism, digital media, content writing, and for the first time, I saw a path forming. Not a dream, but a direction. I started writing short essays, opinion pieces, and later, personal stories. I submitted one to a youth magazine. It was titled, "When You're the One They Left Behind." I didn't name names. I didn't even say it was my story. But the raw emotion in that piece? It was mine. A few weeks later, the editor emailed me. She said the piece made her cry. Said she hadn't read something that honest in a long time. They published it. When I saw my name in print, I just stared at it. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt seen, finally. Not as someone's daughter or someone's sister. Just me. That article went viral in our local community. Girls from different cities messaged me. Some said, "This felt like you wrote my life." Others asked, "How did you move on?" The truth was, I hadn't moved on. I'd just moved forward. There's a difference. One night, I was sitting on the bus home, and I got a message from my brother. It was long, longer than anything he'd ever sent me. He said he finally knew where the money had come from. He said no one told him, and he found out from Mom by accident. He apologized. Genuinely. Not in that empty, quick way people do, but in a slow, thoughtful, guilty kind of way. He wrote, "If I'd known, I never would have let them do it." And weirdly, I believed him. But I didn't know what to say. I still don't. Maybe forgiveness isn't a moment. Maybe it's a process, a slow rebuild, like stitching together something torn. That same week, I was offered a part-time internship at a local magazine. Nothing big, but it paid. And more than that, it was in my field. My dream was no longer in a locked drawer. It was in motion. One night, I sat down in my tiny rented room, opened my laptop, and started writing another piece. This one was for me. Not for publication. Not for school. Just for my heart. The title? I Lost My Fund. Not My Future. Writing that piece wasn't about healing, it was about reclaiming. I had lost something, yes. Something that can't be returned. But I had also found something deeper, a version of myself I didn't know existed. One that didn't wait for approval. One that didn't fall apart when others let her down. My internship turned into a job offer by the end of the semester. Small publication. Nothing glamorous, but the editor believed in me. She told me, "You've got a voice people trust. That can't be taught." I started doing interviews, writing community stories, helping younger girls find their way into writing. And little by little, I was building not just a career, but a new identity, one that had nothing to do with what I lost, and everything to do with what I earned. Back at home, things were quieter. My dad tried in his own way. He sent updates about job fairs and low-interest student loans. He even forwarded me a course link once, adding a short note. "Might help your writing." I didn't reply, but I read it. Every word. He was trying to reach me without forcing closeness, and I respected that. My mom, on the other hand, softened a lot. We had coffee one morning when I came to visit, just the two of us in the kitchen. She didn't say sorry, not directly, but at one point, she looked down at her mug and whispered, "We thought we were saving one child. We didn't realize we were breaking another." That was the closest thing to an apology I got. And somehow it was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged the truth. There's something powerful about being seen, really seen by the people who hurt you. And yet, even then, I didn't go back. I had learned to live on my own, to budget,
To fail. To start again.
I'd built something out of nothing, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Months turned into a year. My sister started talking about colleges. One night she texted, "I'm going to apply where you applied. Maybe I'll get in and actually go." I didn't say much in return, just sent her a thumbs up and a heart. But my chest felt heavy. I wanted to tell her, don't trust promises blindly. Have a backup plan. But I didn't want to harden her. I wanted her to hope the way I used to. So instead I told her, "I'll help you with your essay. Let me read your drafts." She replied instantly, "I was hoping you'd say that." Funny how life works. I lost a future once. But here I was helping someone else build theirs. The day my sister submitted her first college application, she called me from her room at home. I was walking home from work, holding a sandwich in one hand and my phone in the other. "I hit send," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "It's done." I stopped walking. "You proud?" She was quiet for a second. Then she whispered, "Yeah, I am." I felt something tighten in my chest, not pain, not jealousy, just this full, quiet ache. I had imagined that moment for myself so many times. sitting at my desk, hitting submit, then jumping up in celebration. But instead I got silence. A shut door. A lost fund. And still, here I was, standing in the cold, smiling through my sister's voice, feeling genuinely happy that she got to have what I didn't. That's when I realized, this isn't about revenge or being right anymore. It's about making sure the cycle breaks. That no one else in this family has to feel what I did. I went home that weekend and sat down with her, going through her essays one by one. Fixed grammar. Tightened her stories. Showed her how to tell the truth without over-explaining. And while we worked, she asked, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if they hadn't used the money?" I paused.
Thought about it.
Sometimes, I said. But then I remember, if things hadn't gone the way they did, maybe I wouldn't be here, helping you. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Maybe she still thought I deserved better. Maybe she was right. But I wasn't interested in what I deserved anymore. I was focused on what I could build. Later that night, my mom knocked on my door, gently, like she was asking permission. She sat down on the edge of the bed and placed something in my hand.
It was an old flash drive.
"I thought this was gone," she said. "It has photos from when you were little. The day you got your acceptance letter. Videos. Your speeches. I kept them. I couldn't bring myself to watch them after what happened." I held the flash drive tightly in my palm. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me there was once a time when they did believe in me. Before things fell apart. Before choices were made. That version of them still existed somewhere. I went back to my place that night and plugged it into my laptop. Watched grainy videos of my teenage self smiling in front of a mirror in my high school uniform. Watched my mom clapping proudly as I read out my award speech. Watched my dad hugging me when I opened my first college letter. That part hurt, but it also reminded me I had always been enough, even when they forgot it. The first time I stood in front of a crowd to speak, I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't a huge audience, maybe 30, 40 people in a college library, but I could feel every pair of eyes on me. They were waiting to hear my story. And for a moment, I thought, why would anyone care about my pain? But then I remembered something Anya once told me. Your pain is someone else's survival guide. So I spoke. Not like a victim. Not like a hero. Just like a girl who had to grow up too fast because the people who were supposed to protect her chose convenience over conversation. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them how the fun disappeared, how I was left out of the decision, how I worked 2 jobs, how I stayed up at night wondering if I had done something wrong to deserve it. And when I finished, there was silence, the heavy kind, not awkward. People weren't clapping out of politeness. They were just absorbing. Then someone in the back, a girl maybe 2 years younger than me, stood up and said, "That's my story too." Word for word. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about me anymore. From there, things moved fast. I started getting emails from student groups, small media outlets, social organizers, asking if I'd like to write, speak, even help design workshops around rebuilding when support systems fail. I didn't say yes to everything. I wasn't chasing spotlight, but I chose what felt right. Meanwhile, back at home, my sister got into the same university I had once dreamed of. When the acceptance email came, she called me crying. They said yes, she kept repeating, as if afraid it would disappear if she stopped saying it out loud. My mom called too. This time, there was no pause. She asked directly, "Can you help us make sure we do this the right way?"
I didn't hesitate.
Yes. I didn't say it because I had fully forgiven them. I said it because my sister deserved better. She deserved the version of our parents I never got, the ones who listened, who planned ahead, who didn't break promises behind closed doors. Over the next few weeks, I sat down with them, budgets, aid applications, housing timelines, everything. I didn't do it emotionally. I treated it like a project. Focused. Measured.
Clean.
One afternoon, my dad pulled me aside. He didn't say much. Just, "You didn't have to do all this. But I'm glad you did." I didn't smile. I just nodded. Because part of me still remembered being 17, sitting at that same table, waiting for a truth that broke me. A few months later, I got invited to speak at a bigger event, a regional youth leadership summit. Hundreds of students. Real stage. Real lights. A microphone that echoed back in your chest when you breathed too hard. I stood backstage gripping a folded piece of paper. I'd written a speech. Clean, polished, full of the right words. But as I waited for them to call my name, I realized that version of the story wasn't me anymore. I didn't want to sound like a survivor giving a TED Talk. I just wanted to be honest. So I left the paper behind and walked on stage with nothing but my voice. I told them everything. Not just the pain, but the disappointment, the silence, the work, the guilt, the exhaustion. And also the tiny moments of hope. The kindness of strangers. The power of one friend who says, "Stay with me." The strength that grows in you when no one else is watching. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They stood. Some wiped their eyes. Others just looked down at their laps like they needed a minute. Afterward, a woman approached me, older, maybe mid-40s. She said, "I'm a school counselor. I've seen kids break under less than what you carried. You don't just tell stories. You hand out tools." That line stayed with me for weeks. You hand out tools. Because for so long I thought I was just writing to feel seen. But maybe, in sharing what happened, the betrayal, the rebuilding, the quiet decisions to keep going, I was building ladders for other girls trapped in dark places. Back at work, things began shifting too. My editor gave me my first full investigative feature. Not fluff. Not community news. A real story about education inequality in low-income neighborhoods. She said, "You know how it feels when systems fail. I need someone who writes from inside that." I poured myself into it. Interviewed kids, teachers, single mothers, social workers. Spent nights cross-checking facts, fighting for deadlines. When it finally went to print, it had my name in bold at the top. Not contributor. Not intern. Just my name. My dad saw it first.
He called.
"Your article," he said, his voice low. "It made me feel something I've been avoiding for years." I didn't ask what that was. He paused, then added, "We were wrong.
We hurt you.
We didn't protect you when we should have. But somehow, you still protected your sister and us." That was the first time he'd said it like that. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to argue or shut him down. I just said, "Thank you." Forgiveness didn't wash over me like a wave. It crept in like slow rain.
Quiet.
Unexpected. And soft. That winter, I turned 21. No party. No cake. No crowded rooms singing out of tune. Just me, a small candle I stuck into a blueberry muffin, and a quiet night sky outside my window. But that night felt different. Not empty, peaceful. I sat on the floor, pulled my laptop onto my knees, and opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. It held everything from that year: rejection emails, screenshots of overdue bills, photos of cramped study spaces, notes from my professor, the article that had gone viral. I scrolled through it all slowly, like flipping through scars. Then I opened a blank document. No title. No plan. And I wrote one sentence. I thought I lost everything, but maybe I was just making space. It felt true. In losing the life I was promised, I had made space for one I never imagined. One where I was the architect. No one to blame. No one to wait for. Just me, building slow, steady, stubborn steps forward. Weeks later, I got an unexpected message from a well-known podcast host who had read my article. She said she wanted to feature me, not just for my story, but because she believed young women needed to hear a voice that didn't come from privilege or polished beginnings. I was scared. I'd never spoken to such a large audience before, but I said yes. We recorded remotely. She asked, "If you could go back and talk to that girl, the one who just found out the fund was gone, what would you say?" I didn't even have to think. I'd tell her it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel hurt. But don't let that be the end of your story. You're going to be the one who writes the next chapters, not them. When the episode went live, messages poured in. Girls from different countries. Mothers who had failed their daughters and wanted to do better. Even fathers who admitted they'd made similar mistakes. One message stood out. It was from a girl named Lena, 17 years old. She wrote, "Your story didn't just sound like mine, it gave mine a future." That line broke me open. In the best way.
It reminded me why I kept going.
Why I didn't let that betrayal harden me into someone bitter or cold. Because if I gave up, the silence would win. And I wasn't built to go quietly. After the podcast, my inbox didn't stop. Not just with praise, but with real, raw messages. Girls telling me their fund was used for weddings. Others saying their parents promised the world and handed them silence. One girl wrote, "I haven't spoken to my dad in 3 years. After your story, I'm not sure if I ever want to." I didn't know how to respond to all of them. I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a guru. But I was something else, proof. Proof that you can be forgotten by your family and still become unforgettable in the world. That week, I pitched a new column to my editor. First Daughters. It would be dedicated to girls who were expected to be the strong one. The fixers. The protectors. The ones who always understood. She said yes before I even finished the pitch. Every week, I shared one story. Sometimes mine. Sometimes someone else's. I changed names when needed, but the emotions were always honest. Girls wrote in from everywhere, sharing quiet betrayals, heavy expectations, the loneliness of being dependable. The column took off.
Slowly, then fast.
My sister framed the first print copy and gave it to me. On the back, she wrote, "You weren't just left behind. You cleared the path for us." That made me cry quietly at my desk when no one was around. I still visited home sometimes. My relationship with my dad remained distant but civil. With my mom, it was warmer, slow conversations over tea, soft moments when she asked about my writing like she was catching up on a daughter she had once overlooked. But something had shifted forever. I no longer walked into that house expecting to belong. I walked in as a visitor, not with resentment, just with peace. Because I had built a new home, not of bricks and keys, but of self-worth. A life no one gave me. A future no one handed down. Every piece was mine. I don't remember exactly when I stopped grieving the loss of that college fund. There wasn't a date. No event. No sharp turn where I thought, okay, I'm over it now. It faded the way sunlight disappears in the evening, not suddenly, but slowly. One layer at a time. First the resentment, then the longing, and finally the hope that it might be fixed. Some wounds don't close cleanly. They just stop bleeding. I still had moments where I'd flinch, like when someone talked about their dorm experience, or how their dad bought them a new laptop for school, or how they skipped a class because their tuition was already paid. Those weren't jealous moments, just quiet stings, like small paper cuts across something you thought had healed. But they never broke me again. Because now, I had something stronger than what I lost. Proof of survival. One morning, I was invited to a panel on self-made success. I hated the term. Self-made? What does that even mean? No one is self-made. Even the strongest of us have, at some point, been held by someone, a friend, a stranger, a teacher, a voice in a podcast we stumbled on at 3 a.m. No one climbs alone. And if they say they did, they're lying. So when the host introduced me like this, she built her future from the ashes of betrayal, I smiled politely, but inside I thought, no, I didn't build it from ashes. I built it from scraps, from late shifts, missed birthdays, and tears no one saw. Still, I went up, sat on that couch, and spoke. There was a girl in the audience, maybe 19. She asked, "Do you ever wish you'd just stayed angry forever?" It made me pause. I told her, I did. For a long time. I wore my anger like armor, because if I took it off, I'd feel everything else. The hurt, the betrayal, the abandonment. And that scared me more than anything. But eventually, I continued, you realize anger only burns you, not the people who hurt you. And it doesn't rebuild anything. It just makes you tired. She nodded, eyes watery. After the event, she waited until everyone left and hugged me tightly. I'm going through the same thing, she whispered. I needed this. I held her back. And in that moment, I realized something no college ever teaches. When your story becomes someone else's oxygen, your pain stops being pointless. A few weeks later, I got a message from a literary agent. She had been reading my columns, following my story quietly. She asked if I'd ever considered writing a memoir, not the dramatic kind, but something raw and honest for young women who had lost their safety nets. I stared at the screen for a long time. Writing a book felt permanent. It meant telling everything. Not just what made me strong, but what made me small. What made me angry. What made me question my own worth. But then I thought of Lena, of the girl from the panel, of my sister. So I replied, yes. I think I'm ready. We started working slowly. No deadlines. No rush. Just voice notes, journal entries, bits of truth scattered like puzzle pieces. It was exhausting. Some nights, I couldn't sleep after writing a single chapter. Others, I'd cry in the middle of typing and close my laptop without saving. But I kept going. Because every page I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of the girl who once sat on the edge of her bed, wondering why she didn't matter enough to be protected. In one chapter I wrote, "They didn't just empty a fund. They emptied my belief that I was safe in their hands. But what they didn't know, what I didn't know, was that safety isn't given. It's built. And I was capable of building my own." That line stayed with me. I thought back to all the nights I skipped dinner to make rent. All the mornings I stood at bus stops in the rain. All the times I said, "I'm fine," when I was anything but. And I realized this was the real education. Not the one I lost, but the one I lived. One evening, I visited my sister on campus. Her dorm looked like the photos we once scrolled through as kids, string lights, sticky notes on walls, open textbooks everywhere. She hugged me at the door and said, "I wouldn't be here without you." I looked around her room. I saw the version of life I never got, and felt no bitterness, because now she had it.
And that was enough.
We sat by the window, legs crossed, sharing cold coffee. She asked, "Do you ever think you'll stop writing about what happened?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said softly. "But maybe one day, I'll stop writing with pain. Maybe I'll write it with peace instead." She smiled. "You already do." The memoir took almost a year to complete. It wasn't a straight path, more like a circle I kept walking, sometimes stepping forward, sometimes stepping back. Some stories took weeks to write. Others poured out in one night like I had been holding them in for years. When I turned in the final draft, I didn't feel excited. I felt quiet. Like I'd just handed over a piece of myself to the world and wasn't sure how it would be held. The title was simple. She Was Promised More. The publisher loved it. The team said it was elegant and sharp, but I didn't care about marketing language. What mattered to me was that every word inside that book had been wrestled from somewhere real, written at 2 a.m., whispered in the dark, typed through trembling hands. When the release date came closer, I avoided social media. I didn't want to see fake excitement or empty blurbs from people who barely knew my name. But then something unexpected happened. People started sharing quotes from the book. Real people. Girls in dorm rooms. Women in small towns. Even some fathers, quietly tagging me with words like, "I failed my daughter." This book made me see it. The night before launch, I sat in my room alone. No celebration. No launch party.
Just me.
And I held the book in my hands, this thing made of pain and patience, and I whispered to no one, "This is mine. No one can take this from me." The next morning, it sold out in under 4 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, deeply, like I hadn't in years. My sister called, screaming on FaceTime, "You did it." I laughed finally. "No," I said. "We did." Over the following weeks, interviews flooded in. Some were awkward, surface level. "So, what advice would you give to girls who feel overlooked?" Others hit harder. One journalist asked, "Do your parents support the book?" I paused. Then answered honestly, "They support me." That's enough. And it was. Because by then, my parents had read every chapter. They didn't praise it. They didn't criticize it. They just said, "We didn't know how deeply we failed you." That was the first time I ever heard them use the word fail. And that, in itself, was a kind of repair. Not everything needs to be glued back together. Sometimes, acknowledgement is enough. I remember sitting in a small independent bookstore 2 months later, doing a live reading. The room was full. Not just with readers, but with people like me. Daughters who had been silent too long. Women who carried the invisible weight of keeping their families from crumbling. Girls who had once been told, "You'll understand when you're older," and now realized they do understand. And it still hurts. After the reading, one woman came up to me, maybe in her early 30s. She looked exhausted, like life had been too loud for too long. She held the book to her chest and said, "You told my story before I could." Then she pulled something out of her bag, an envelope. "I never sent this," she said. "It's a letter I wrote to my parents after they used my college fund for my cousin's wedding. They never even apologized." She placed it on the table in front of me. "Will you read it?" she asked. I opened it slowly. The letter was raw. Shaking words, ink smudged in places. Lines like, "I wasn't angry you helped someone else. I was angry you forgot about me in the process. And you told me I was strong, that I'd understand. But strength isn't an excuse to ignore someone's pain." I finished reading and looked up. "I think you should still send it," I said. She nodded, eyes full but steady. "I think I will. Tonight." And I realized again, this was never about just one girl and one lost fund. It was about all the girls who never got a voice. All the stories that sat in inboxes, unsent. All the truths whispered into pillows instead of told out loud. Later that night, I walked home slowly. The streets were cold, but my chest was warm. I passed a small restaurant with a family laughing at a table by the window. A girl, maybe 16, was showing her parents something on her phone. They were listening, eyes on her, smiling. Present. I smiled too. Not out of envy, but because I knew someone out there didn't lose their voice. Someone was heard. And maybe, just maybe, that girl wouldn't have to write a book about being forgotten. A few weeks after the book's release, my father called and asked if we could meet. Not at home. Not somewhere familiar. He suggested a quiet cafe near the edge of town, one I used to pass on my way to my old job. I almost didn't go. Not because I was angry, that part had thinned out long ago, but because I didn't know what else we could possibly say to each other. We'd danced around the past enough. We'd worn out the apologies and silences. What was left? But something in me, maybe the same part that still cried at old voicemail recordings, said, "Just go." He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, wearing the same jacket I remembered him wearing the day I moved out. He stood up when I walked in. That small gesture, so simple, caught me off guard. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We just sat. For the first few minutes, it was small talk. Weather. Work. My sister's finals. Nothing that mattered. Then he looked down, hands wrapped around his coffee cup, and said, "I read the book." I nodded. "I didn't know how much you carried," he said, voice low. Or maybe I did, and I ignored it because facing it meant admitting we failed you. I didn't interrupt. I just let him speak. "You were always the one we never worried about," he continued. "You were the one who figured things out, who stayed quiet. We mistook your silence for strength. And that gave us permission to forget you." That line, it undid something in me. Because he wasn't saying, "We were doing our best." He wasn't defending. He was just naming the truth. And sometimes, truth is the apology. "I don't expect anything," he added. "Not forgiveness. Not closeness. I just needed you to know you were never invisible. We just didn't look hard enough." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who made a selfish decision, but a man who had lived with the weight of it every day since. "I believed you would protect me," I said, my voice steady. "That's what hurt the most. Not the money, not the struggle, just the betrayal of trust." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been waiting to hear that sentence for years. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. But it was real. And for once, I believed him. We didn't fix everything that day, but something inside me loosened. Like I could finally breathe without holding my chest together. After we parted ways, I walked for a while. Past bookstores with my name in the window. Past buses I used to take to night shifts. Past benches where I once cried into my scarf because I didn't have enough money for dinner and rent. And I thought, I survived everything they thought would break me. But more than that, I had turned it into something bigger. Not just success. Meaning. Later that night, I opened my laptop and started writing something new. Not for a column, not for a podcast, not for a publisher. Just for me. A letter. To the girl I used to be. I know you feel forgotten right now. Like the air's been pulled from the room and no one's noticed you're suffocating. You're angry, and you have every right to be. You trusted the people who promised you the world, and they handed you a gap year that wasn't yours. A silence you didn't ask for. But listen to me. You don't stay broken. You don't disappear. You become someone who takes that silence and turns it into a story, not for revenge, but for release. You'll learn that power doesn't come from proving you're fine. It comes from saying, I wasn't, but I found a way anyway. One day, your voice will carry, not in shouting but in truth. You'll help others. You'll build something real. And when people say, how did you do it? You'll smile, gently, and say, one day at a time. You're going to be okay. Not just okay, alive. Whole.
Seen. Me.
That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. No racing thoughts. No imagined arguments. Just silence. But not the kind that used to haunt me. The kind that heals. The following spring, I started receiving invitations from schools, not universities but high schools. Guidance counselors, principals, sometimes even students themselves would reach out after reading my book or listening to one of my podcast interviews. Most of them said the same thing. We want our girls to hear from someone real. At first, I hesitated. I'd grown used to sitting behind a keyboard, behind a mic, behind a safe layer of distance. But walking into a classroom, standing in front of teenage girls with wide eyes and heavy hearts, that was different. That was raw. That was immediate. There was no editing honesty when you're face to face with someone whose entire future is still in question. But I said yes. The first school I visited was a public school in a small town. Not polished. No stage lights. Just a room with folding chairs and a projector that kept flickering. About 40 girls filled the space, and a few boys too, all in uniform. Some smiled when I walked in. Others avoided eye contact, arms crossed, like they were preparing not to care. I stood at the front and introduced myself, not as an author, not as a speaker, not even as a success story. I told them, I'm just someone who once got left behind by the people who said they'd never leave. That was all it took. A few eyes softened, a few hands uncrossed, and one girl in the front blinked twice, like she was trying not to cry. I told them about the college acceptance letter I never got to use, about watching my future dissolve without warning, about working long nights, missing meals, and smiling when people asked, how's school, just to avoid explaining what had happened. I didn't dress it up. I didn't make it poetic. I just laid it out flat and let it breathe. After I spoke, they didn't clap. They asked questions. Real ones. Did you ever want to just cut your family off completely? Do you still feel angry? Do you think you'll ever trust people like that again? And my answers weren't neat. I didn't pretend everything had healed. I told them I still had moments of hesitation, that sometimes forgiveness isn't a final destination, it's something you choose again and again, even when you don't feel like it. I told them that I loved my parents, but I'd never be their little girl again. That chapter was over. But I wasn't bitter, just awake. After the session ended, the girl from the front came up to me with her sleeves pulled over her hands. She said quietly, they used my college money for my brother's rehab. No one asked me. No one explained. They just said it was an emergency. But when I cried, they called me selfish. I looked at her, and it was like I was staring into a mirror from 5 years ago. I didn't say anything profound. I just said, you're not selfish. You're human. And it's okay to want your own future. She nodded, then asked, Can I hug you? So we stood there in that flickering room, holding each other like strangers who knew everything that mattered about each other. That moment didn't fix her life, but maybe it gave her language. And sometimes that's all you need to begin. I started doing more school visits after that. Not for money, not for publicity, just because I knew what it meant to be 17 and silently drowning while everyone around you is clapping for someone else. Every time I walked into a new room, I reminded myself, these girls don't need perfect answers. They need someone who's already walked through the fire and made it to the other side without pretending it never burned. Back home, my sister was thriving. She made the dean's list. She joined the student newspaper. She even sent me drafts of her poems and asked for feedback. Sometimes, I'd read one of her pieces and feel tears in my throat, not because they were sad, but because they were so bright. She was writing from a place I never had access to at her age, safety. And I felt proud. Not in a jealous way, but in the way a gardener feels when a flower finally blooms where there was once just dry soil. My mother called more often now, not with questions or guilt, just with softness. She'd say things like, I made that lentil soup you love, or I found that sweater you left here years ago, the navy one. Do you still want it? And I knew what those words really meant. I remember you. I see you. I'm trying. And as for my father, our conversations stayed brief, but honest. We didn't pretend we were close. But there was mutual effort now. He listened more. He never dismissed my boundaries. And sometimes, he'd text a quiet, read your article today, proud of you. I never replied with anything more than thanks, but it meant something. A door wasn't open, but it wasn't locked anymore. One evening, I stood at my apartment window and watched a group of teenagers laughing as they passed by. One of them was wearing a college hoodie, the same one I used to dream about owning. And I didn't feel pain this time, just peace. I no longer needed that hoodie, that campus, or that dorm bed to prove anything. I had made it, not the way I thought I would, but in a way that was completely mine. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to accept before. I was proud of myself, not just for surviving, not for turning pain into content, but for choosing again and again, not to shut down, not to disappear, not to go numb, but to stay open. Open to growth, open to people, open to love, even when it was imperfect. I wasn't the girl who had been betrayed anymore. I was the woman who rebuilt. And maybe, just maybe, that was always the real story. A few months later, on an ordinary Sunday, I took a train out of the city. No speaking engagement, no event, just a personal trip. I needed space to think, not in front of a screen or a crowd, but somewhere quiet, where no one knew who I was. I ended up in a small coastal town, sleepy streets, salty air, the kind of place where time feels slower. I checked into a modest inn and left my phone in my bag. I didn't post anything. I didn't tell anyone where I was. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain my absence. I wasn't disappearing. I was resting. I spent hours walking by the water, letting the wind wrap around me like an old friend. I thought about how far I'd come, not in the social media sense of look what I've achieved, but in the quieter sense of I made it through. I made it through the moment they emptied the fund, through the sleepless nights, through the jobs that barely paid rent, through the loneliness no one saw, through the forgiveness I thought I'd never give. And most of all, I made it through without becoming bitter. That, I realized, was the real victory. That night, in the little room at the inn, I sat by the window with a pen in my hand and a notebook in my lap. No laptop, no backspace key. Just ink and silence. And I wrote something I hadn't dared to write before. To my parents, I don't know if you'll ever fully understand what it felt like to watch my future collapse while you looked me in the eye and told me I'd understand someday. But here's the truth, I do understand now. You were scared. You were overwhelmed. You were trying to keep everything from falling apart, and in the process, you broke something that couldn't be glued back together. I was your first, your trial and error. The one who smiled too early, forgave too easily, and learned too late that loyalty doesn't always protect you. And And yes, what you did hurt me in ways you'll never fully see. But you also gave me one thing, a reason to become my own safety net. You taught me, not by words, but by absence, how to survive. And from that survival, I found strength. A strength I wouldn't trade for any Ivy League dorm room or fully funded tuition.
So I don't hate you.
I don't even resent you anymore. I just see you now as people, not parents.
Flawed.
Fragile. Trying. And maybe that's its own kind of love.
Me.
The next morning, I left that notebook page in the drawer of the bedside table. I didn't take a photo of it. I didn't tear it out. I left it there like a piece of weight I no longer needed to carry. When I returned to the city, something felt different. Not around me, within me. There was no longer an ache behind every achievement. No more wondering if I was enough. No more hoping someone would finally say, "You deserved better." Because I had already told that to myself. And that was all I needed. My life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still deadlines, still taxes, still nights where I doubted my voice or stared too long at blank pages. But now, the foundation beneath me wasn't cracked anymore. It was solid, built from work no one saw and healing no one clapped for. And slowly, I stopped telling this story as a wound. It became a chapter, not the whole book, just a chapter. The one that taught me the difference between being chosen and choosing myself. I still write. I still speak. But I don't talk about the college fund in every room I walk into anymore. Because that part of me, she got what she needed. She was heard. Now I speak about joy, about reclaiming identity, about how some of the most powerful women I've ever met were once the forgotten daughters of chaotic homes. I tell girls, it's okay if your parents didn't protect you. That doesn't make you unworthy. It just means you'll have to become the protector you never had. And that doesn't make you broken. It makes you brilliant. And when they cry, I let them. Because I know those tears. The ones you cry when someone finally names what you've been feeling. That's not weakness. That's freedom. Sometimes people ask me if I would go back and change what happened. If I would want the phone restored, the acceptance letter reissued, the easy path handed back. I always say no. Because if they hadn't chosen my sister over me, if they hadn't lied, if they hadn't expected me to simply understand and move on, I might have never discovered who I really was. Not the obedient daughter, not the straight-A student, not the girl they were proud of when it was convenient, but the woman who stood in the storm, got soaked, and still found her way forward. Not despite the pain, but through. And that woman, she's not angry anymore. She's home. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it stop here. Share this with someone who's ever felt forgotten. Tell your story in the comments, even if it's just one line. And if you want more stories that speak what others are too afraid to say, subscribe. Because this channel isn't just about stories, it's about being seen.